So whether this is your first time butchering your own deer or you're just wanting a quick refresher course, the absolute number one thing I want you to remember as you begin working on your deer is that butchering is a hard thing to mess up. Please realize that if you mess up a cut here or there, you can always turn that into something else, and hey, who knows, it may just turn into a traditional cut for a favorite meal. Welcome to the One Doe series, everyone, and today we're talking about butchering your deer for use in the kitchen with your favorite or soon-to-be favorite recipes. With hunting dating back as far as it has and the art of hunting and butchering passed down from generation to generation, it is completely reasonable to hear that someone butchers their deer completely different than what I am about to show you. And I am by no means an expert butcher or trying to prove that your way of butchering a deer is wrong. The point of this video is to simply give a quick guide to put someone on the right path of butchering their own deer, perhaps for the first time. I feel it is important to remind you all that I was considering my future One Doe recipes as I worked my way through my deer, so some of this work may seem unnecessary if you only have jerky and summer sausage in mind. Lastly, I did not have a bandsaw available for cutting up any of this deer, so my main tools were a standard kitchen knife, a fillet knife, and a hacksaw. And while a hacksaw isn't the greatest tool for cutting through bone on your deer, as the teeth are very shallow and will gunk up rather easily, for under $10 a hacksaw will do the deed, and you can always decide to buy a bone saw later on if you deem it necessary. Now, the videos I have of me go straight into the butchering of the deer. However, I am going to show a quick tutorial via drawing on hanging up your deer, as well as skinning your deer and preparing it for butchering. If you are not interested in this, feel free to look down at the time bar below, which should be in sections for you to skip forward to the butchering. After you have hunted your deer and field dressed them, the next step is getting them into a hanging position for easy cleaning. You could always clean your deer from a lying position, Tywin Lannister style, or something similar to what a butcher may do with a lamb or half of a cow, but hanging the entire deer allows you to move around the animal easily, accessing the entire body, at least until you cut it into smaller portions. Hanging your deer up is fairly simple depending upon what tools you want to use. My family has used the same simple tools for deer since I was quite young, which is simply two lengths of rope approximately 16 inches long with loops on either end and screw hooks inserted directly into the ceiling joists. With these made, you'll then need to take a look at the hind legs of your deer. Similar to our anatomy, deer have a tibia running down the front of their leg, which creates a gap of skin between the tibia and Achilles tendon connected to their heel bone. With your knife, you're going to want to create an incision in this gap with which you will pull one end of your looped rope through. With the tibia between each loop of your rope, you'll want to take one loop and insert it into the other loop, pulling tight to create a tight hold between the tibia and heel. By doing these same steps to the opposite leg, you will now have two firm holds on your deer to hang. It does make for a quick job if you then back your truck bed up to the screw hooks, lifting half of the distance. With your deer hung up, it is now time to start skinning. If you plan on preserving the skin of your deer, then you might want to take a different approach to saving your pelt. However, if you're simply wanting to remove the pelt from your deer, a good place to start is removing the front legs of your deer from the wrist, cutting downwards from the open rib cage, then creating an L-shaped cut to these now open ends of the front legs. From here, you'll then want to move up to the hind legs, creating a cut around the leg of your deer near where the loops are, and then cutting down the inside of the leg to where your cut line from your field dressing is presently. During this stage, you can also determine whether you want to remove the head of the deer or not. Doing the former will make the skinning process easier. From this point on, it is as simple as pulling the skin downwards from the hind legs, letting gravity do the work, and gently cutting away any fascia holding the pelt onto the muscle below. With the skin removed, you can now prepare for butchering. When butchering my doe, the first step I took was removing the front legs from the rest of the torso. To do this, I took my trusty kitchen knife and worked my way from the armpit of the deer around the shoulder blade and back down to the armpit again. The reason I prefer to use a kitchen knife at this stage over a fillet knife is simply because I feel that at this point it's kind of getting to the dirty work, and a thick, strong kitchen knife will cut through this muscle and work against bone while not worrying about breaking a fillet knife. It is pretty easy to get carried away removing meat connected to the shoulder blade, which you could use for either skirt steaks or as part of your ribs, so depending upon what you prefer, remember to think ahead. With the front legs removed, we're now going to move to the back side of the deer to remove the precious backstrap. The wild deer travels a great deal more than our domestic animals, and because of this has a lot of muscle and not a lot of fat. This puts a great deal of value on the backstrap and tenderloin, as they are muscles that do not get worked as much as many of the other muscles on the deer's body. From the backside, you should be able to see where the spine of the deer meets the hind legs. From this point, you will want to cut into the backstrap to the spine, and from here, similar to skinning a fish, you will want to run your knife down the spine of your deer, taking your knife to cut underneath the backstrap against the ribs as you work your way down. Gravity is going to be a great tool during this step, however, make sure not to pull too hard and tear the backstrap as it's removed. Once you have removed one side of the backstrap, do the same on the opposite side of the spine. Remember that this backstrap makes up a lot of would-be steaks like your round bone chops and loin chops, so if you have a bandsaw at your disposal and would rather create steaks than remove the backstrap as one single piece, feel free to skip this step. With the backstrap removed, you can now create a cut between the 5th and 6th rib, or wherever you think would be a good cut, to section off the shoulder ribs and neck from the rest of your ribs. Cut through the spine and set this aside with your legs to trim later. With just our bottom ribs and spine left with our legs, we'll now want to saw off the remaining ribs and spine to dig into later. Looking into the rib cage of your deer, you should see the tenderloins of your deer between the end of the rib cage and hind quarters. You can choose to use your fillet knife or kitchen knife to delicately remove these sections of valued meat for future use. Now, with our hind quarters being the only cut left hanging, we'll want to saw these down the middle to separate them for cutting individually. At this point, your main goal is attempting to separate the hind quarter from the shank while removing the meat from the tibia and femur bones. When it comes to removing the meat from the hind quarter, there seems to be two favorite methods. You can either remove each individual muscle at a time, creating smaller sections, or you can simply cut the entirety of the muscle away from the bone and decide what to do with it later on. The majority of this meat will make wonderful stew meat as well as a roast and hamburger, so the size of the cuts really aren't going to make too much of a difference with your options. I took my time when it came to separating the femur from the shank, as well as keeping the shank in good condition for my future bone broth, as well as keeping good bones for King Bjorn, who was a total fan. Now that we have our sections of deer laid out for us, it's time to start working on the front legs. I start into the leg by separating the meat on the shoulder blade or scapula from the meat on the humerus. I like to now use my fillet knife at this stage as I start to make more confident cuts. Similar to the back leg, the majority of this shoulder meat will be made for roast and stew meat, so our goal is to remove the meat from the bone, leaving the shank for bone stock or a roast. Next, I'm going to work on our ribs. To do this, I've split my ribs down the spine, leaving a nice cut line for each half of the rib cage. Once I have the spine removed, I'm going to saw down the middle of my ribs to create the dividing line between my rack of venison ribs and my spare ribs. My tip for the ribs is to get through one rib with your saw and then roll back the rack of ribs, creating a handle on your meat, making it easier to cut through the rest of your rack. At this point, I could then split my spare ribs yet again and cut them individually, or move into the shoulder ribs and neck. I voted for the latter. Now working on the neck and shoulder ribs, my goal is to cut away any good chunks of meat away from the neck, as I plan on using the neck solely for my bone broth in the future. Separating the neck from the shoulder ribs makes it a bit easier to save your neck for later, as well as getting any remaining chunks of potential stew meat and focus on your shoulder ribs. You can also extract the remaining trachea from the neck at this point, which you could dry out for a dog chew, but I didn't do it this time. Sorry, King Bjorn. With the neck stored away, it's time to focus on the shoulder ribs. Like the other ribs, I am separating them from the spine to give me a better edge. If you plan on cooking these ribs in an oven or smoker, you could leave the spine on, but removing the spine allows the ribs to cook a bit more evenly if laid down flat. With the spine removed, we could have these ribs as well, but they are that much closer to being ready for the barbecue. With your deer all disassembled and with coolers full of meat, it's now time to get into the cleaning aspect of your deer. If you did a good job in the field dressing and butchering, you could minimize this stage, but being that this is a wild animal harvested in nature, dirt and grass on your meat should be expected. This step is a bit tedious and time consuming, but my favorite way of preparing my meat for the cutting board is simply putting half of my meat in a cooler, spraying it down with water, and then going through each part individually, removing grass and debris, and then placing them into a separate bag. With your bags of meat, you are now ready to move inside. Divvy them out into freezer bags and butcher paper packages of stew meat and ribs, depending upon what you plan on cooking up. You've butchered your first deer and it should feel great. All of your hard work is paid off, and now all you have to do is cook. Luckily, that's the fun part, and also where my good friend Chef Andrew Fontes of the luxurious Lowe's Kansas City Hotel will be coming in to help in the creation of our own venison recipes, which you can use with your own deer meat from your previous season. So if you haven't liked the video already, then I would greatly appreciate you doing so. Maybe comment down below to tell me about your latest hunt, as well as considering subscribing if you have any interest trying out any of our future recipes. We'll see you in the next episode of One Doe, everyone, and as always, remember, we're one planet, one family, game on.